There is a kind of man the world doesn't notice, until his silence changes everything. He doesn't ask to be seen. He doesn't beg to be heard. He simply moves differently, speaks less, feels more, and when he does act, the room shifts. Because presence like his isn't performed, it's built, quietly, brick by brick in the shadows of his own disappointment. This isn't about charm. It isn't about tactics. It's about becoming the kind of man who doesn't chase attention, because he carries a weight that demands it without asking. Most men were taught to impress, to prove, to talk their way into love and validate their place in someone else's life through action after action. But deep down, there's a desire even they don't speak of. It's not the desire to dominate. It's not even about sex. It's about being chosen, silently, without fanfare, without begging, just once, for who they are when they stop trying. That quiet wish to be seen and respected, not for what they say, but for what they carry in silence. That's the wound no one talks about. That's the wound this video addresses. Zeno of Citium lost everything, not metaphorically, literally. A shipwreck destroyed his wealth, his identity, and the life he knew. He didn't scream. He didn't demand the world to hear his pain. He walked through Athens in silence, learning, observing, rebuilding from the inside. That is the essence of Stoicism, not indifference, but presence under pressure. The modern man faces a different kind of shipwreck, the collapse of emotional respect, the slow erosion of masculine worth in a world that praises noise and punishes stillness. Like Zeno, your healing won't come from louder arguments. It will come when you stop performing and start walking. Marcus Aurelius said it with brutal simplicity. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. That line should be tattooed on the heart of every man who's been made to explain himself, defend his worth, or prove his loyalty. Because the truth is, no amount of proof changes someone's blindness, and the more you argue your value, the more you surrender it. Power isn't declared, it's lived. When you move with integrity, without the need to convince, the world aligns, because you've stopped forcing it to. What follows are not tips to make her want you. They are not tricks. They are not psychological hacks. They are movements of a man rebuilding his architecture. These are the actions that don't just make you attractive, they make you undeniable. Not because you asked for attention, but because you became impossible to overlook. And when a man reaches that level of self-possession, it doesn't matter who notices. He's already found what he was looking for, himself. This isn't about her. It's about remembering the man you were before you tried to be what she needed. The man who used to move with weight, with clarity, with stillness. These next steps are not for performance. They are for you, to protect your soul, to rebuild your presence, to become unignorable, not with noise, but with truth, in silence, where your strength never needed a voice. A man who explains too much is a man trying not to be left. Every time you break your silence to justify your feelings, clarify your intentions, or decode your soul in real time, something sacred within you dissolves. It doesn't mean your words are weak. It means they're misplaced. Because explanation is rarely about truth. It's about fear. Fear of misunderstanding. Fear of abandonment. Fear that if you don't say it right, you'll lose what little connection you still feel. But connection earned through over-explaining is never real. It's maintenance, not intimacy. There's a gravity in silence. Not the cold kind that punishes, but the still kind that says, I know who I am, even if you don't. When you reclaim that, you stop giving emotional discounts. You stop translating your inner world for someone who stopped listening. You stop handing over your soul like a user manual, hoping she'll finally read it. Mystery isn't deception. It's restraint. It's knowing the difference between being honest and being emptied. Most men who over-explain aren't seeking truth. They're seeking security. But security doesn't come from being understood. It comes from standing calmly when you're not. Over-communication is often a scar, a pattern born from abandonment, where love was earned through perfect clarity. But no man should have to bleed himself into comprehension just to be kept. Your silence is not a wall, it's a filter. It separates who values your presence from who only values your performance. When you stop explaining, you regain your gravity. You no longer shrink to be digestible. You stop speaking to soothe someone else's discomfort. And in that quiet, something strange happens. People begin to lean in, not because you're mysterious in some theatrical sense, but because you've remembered something most men forget. Your story doesn't need to be justified to have meaning. Your emotions don't need to be explained to be valid. Your presence, alone, is enough. There's a quiet kind of leadership that no one praises. A man notices the cracked wall, the crooked frame, the broken drawer, and he fixes it, not for applause, not to be thanked, but because he knows that outer order reflects inner command. He repairs what's broken not to impress, but because that's who he is. He doesn't need to say it out loud. The silence of the act is what makes it powerful. The modern world teaches men to be loud about effort, to document progress, to prove worth through performance. But the man who moves without seeking credit moves differently. His actions have weight because they're not diluted by explanation. He doesn't ask for validation. He earns peace by putting things back in place, without waiting to be seen. That kind of discipline rewires a home, a relationship, a soul. In Stoic masculinity, leadership doesn't begin with declarations. It begins with presence. The way you tend to your space, your tools, your body, your mind, it speaks. It teaches without saying a word. The man who quietly repairs what others ignore sends a message stronger than any speech. I am responsible for what I touch, and what I touch, I restore. There's a story of a man who spent every weekend fixing things around the house. No announcements, no sermons, just the sound of tools and quiet focus. Over time, something shifted in his marriage, not because he changed his wife, but because his presence began to remind her of who he really was. Not reactive, not demanding, just steady, capable, centered. That kind of energy doesn't chase respect. It awakens it. The world is full of men trying to fix people. But the man who fixes what's broken around him, silently, consistently, becomes unshakable. He no longer needs words to prove who he is. His actions whisper louder than voices, and in that quiet, he rediscovers the most powerful thing a man can hold: self-governed dignity. Most men listen to be liked. They nod too much, smile too fast, agree too easily, not because they lack opinions, but because somewhere along the way, they learned that to be accepted, they had to soften their presence, shrink their intensity, become agreeable. But what a woman remembers is not the man who confirmed her. It's the man who heard her and stayed unmoved. Not cold, just grounded. When you stop nodding every time someone speaks, you signal something primal. You're not trying to win approval. You're trying to understand. And more than that, you're at peace whether she agrees or not. That subtle shift changes the dynamic completely. It removes the hunger from your presence, the need to be seen, the need to be liked. What remains is stillness, and stillness is powerful. Eye contact is not a performance. It's not about dominance. It's about presence. When held calmly, without tension, without chase, it speaks volumes. It says, I am here. I am not afraid. I am not trying to become anything else in your eyes. That kind of gaze doesn't intimidate. It anchors. It tells her, silently, that she's in the presence of a man who doesn't lose himself just to keep someone else comfortable. Most men either overengage or disconnect, but Stoic masculinity lives in the middle. It holds space without chasing it. It listens without begging to be heard, and that presence, solid, slow, certain, creates a different kind of safety, one that doesn't ask her to stay, but makes her want to, because safety, for her, is not in the words you say. It's in the steadiness of your silence. You don't need to nod to prove you're listening. You don't need to agree to prove you care. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stay. Stay rooted. Stay calm. Stay exactly who you are, no matter how loud the conversation becomes. That's what makes you unforgettable. Not what you say, but how little of yourself you're willing to lose just to be liked. There is a difference between walking out and walking away. One is escape, the other is clarity. When a man leaves in silence, without threats, without slamming doors or shouting his worth, he shifts the entire emotional weight of the room. Not because he's trying to punish, but because he's decided not to bleed for what won't hold him. Most men stay too long in conversations already lost. They raise their voice. They repeat themselves. They try to win with logic what was lost in respect. But every moment spent arguing for your dignity is a moment spent draining it. When you leave, not as reaction, but as recognition, you are not giving up. You are preserving what's left. Zeno taught that real mastery is not about controlling others. It's about controlling yourself. The man who can stay silent while storms rise around him is not detached. He's deeply disciplined. His leaving doesn't scream. It doesn't shame. It simply says, I will not lose myself to prove a point. And that absence? It echoes louder than any final word. Psychologically, a quiet exit creates a vacuum. A space where emotion used to flare now holds stillness. In that stillness, truth appears. Truth. Not always immediately, not always cleanly, but it appears. And sometimes, the most powerful message you can deliver is the one you don't speak, the one written in the space you refuse to fill with noise. A man who walks away from conflict not in rage, but in calm, is not weak. He's rare. He's the kind of man who no longer needs to win battles that cost him his peace. He knows that dignity doesn't announce itself. It simply departs. And in that departure, it becomes unforgettable. Because there is no greater power than the man who can leave, not to hurt, but to heal himself, in silence, with command, without looking back. Most men spend years trying to be understood by women who have already stopped listening. They correct, they explain, they defend, all in the hope that one day she'll finally see their point. But clarity rarely comes through confrontation, especially not in relationships. What makes her pause, what makes her reflect, is not your correction. It's your evolution, not the words you offer, but the man you've become. Every time you try to fix her, you abandon yourself. Every debate becomes another step away from your own posture, your own focus, your own direction. Stoic masculinity refuses that trade. It does not seek to correct. It seeks to refine, and it understands that true influence isn't loud. It's lived. Marcus Aurelius said it clearly. Waste no time correcting others. Fix your own posture. That is the path. That is the power. You don't shift a relationship by forcing growth in someone else. You shift it by becoming the kind of man who no longer argues, because his life now speaks for him. You train in silence. You rise early. You breathe slower. You speak less. You sharpen the man in the mirror until his presence cuts through confusion. And then, you let that presence do the work. Some women evolve with you. Some don't. But when you rise with quiet discipline, you no longer need to push. She will either recognize the man you've become or feel the distance and drift. But either way, you've reclaimed your center. That's the point. Not to control her outcome, but to master your own. Stop trying to be the editor of her emotions. Become the author of your own growth. Let your silence challenge what your words could never reach. Let your consistency rebuild what criticism only weakens. Because when a man stops correcting others and starts correcting himself, he doesn't just change his relationship, he changes the entire direction of his life. Without shouting, without explaining, without asking permission. There's a moment every man faces. A moment where he realizes that repeating himself isn't clarity, it's erosion. You explain, you rephrase, you soften your tone, you raise it, you try again. But nothing lands, nothing changes, and you feel it. That slow, invisible drain of your presence, that subtle unraveling of your self-respect. Not because you're wrong, but because you've stayed too long in a space where your voice echoes, but never returns. A man's value isn't measured by how much he says, it's measured by how much he refuses to waste. Energy is sacred. Attention is sacred. When you speak to be heard and the response is dismissal, distraction, or deflection, you are not in a conversation. You are in an erosion. And Stoic masculinity does not explain itself into silence. It uses silence as a boundary. Epictetus posed a question that still cuts through the noise. Is it within your control? If it is, act. If it's not, release. That release is not apathy. It's not resignation. It's the decision to no longer argue for what should be freely given: respect, attention, presence. You are not obligated to teach someone how to hear you. You are only obligated to honor the space where your soul is no longer trampled. When you withdraw from these conversations, you don't become distant. You become deliberate. You begin to reclaim the parts of you that were spent trying to prove you matter. You remember that silence isn't passive. It's a form of emotional protection. It's the quiet declaration, I'm no longer available for one-sided connection. And in that withdrawal, something shifts. You stop repeating yourself. You stop hoping to be heard by someone who's decided not to listen. You stop showing up where your presence is treated like background noise. And slowly, quietly, you return to yourself. Not bitter, not broken, just done. And in that stillness, your power returns. Not because they finally listened, but because you finally stopped asking them to. There's a sacred kind of power that comes from building something no one sees, a strength that doesn't seek applause, A fire that doesn't need fuel from outside approval. It's the man who trains at dawn when no one's watching, who practices his craft with no audience, who sharpens his discipline in silence, not to be admired, but because it anchors him to himself. That kind of excellence doesn't speak, it radiates. We live in a world obsessed with visibility. Every move broadcast, every effort documented. But there's a different path. The man who becomes exceptional in private rewires his identity. He doesn't need compliments to continue. He doesn't quit when recognition fades. His motivation isn't reactive, it's rooted. Because when you do something just for the mirror, just for the ritual, just for the peace it builds in you, you become unshakable. You want to shift how she sees you? Don't tell her what you're working on. Let her feel it. Let her notice the changes you never named. The body that grew stronger, the mind that calmed, the eyes that no longer flinch. Excellence is magnetic when it doesn't seek attention. And the man who improves in silence becomes a presence people feel, even when he says nothing. There's a story about a man who woke at 5 every morning for a year. No posts, no sharing. Just repetition, just discipline. And over time, something unexplainable changed in him. Not just his routine, his presence, his stillness, his refusal to be moved by chaos. He became solid, not because he told the world he was, but because he chose to be when no one was looking. So find that one thing. A skill, a practice, a devotion, and give it everything. Not to prove your worth, but to remember it. You don't need to announce your journey. The results will speak in the way you walk, in the way you breathe, in the way she watches you from across the room, wondering what changed, without realizing it was everything. Because the man who becomes excellent in silence becomes unforgettable, without ever needing to be seen. Zeno of Citium didn't rebuild his worth through speeches. After losing everything, he didn't shout. He didn't plead. He walked through streets, through silence, through himself, and in that quiet movement, he found something deeper than recognition. He found presence. You are not so different. You've lost things too. Maybe not ships, but parts of yourself. Years, respect, the sound of your own name spoken with reverence. But your silence, if rooted in clarity, can be the start of something sacred. Seneca once wrote, "Silence is a form of speech, and that form is needed now more than ever." In a world that confuses volume with value, the man who can be still becomes a mystery the world cannot ignore. Your calm actions, the ones no one sees, no one thanks you for, no one understands, are the loudest declarations you'll ever make, not because they draw attention, but because they realign you with who you were always meant to be. You don't need to be loud to be remembered. You don't need to be visible to be felt. There is a presence in stillness, a depth in restraint, and the moment you stop trying to be enough for everyone else, you become more than enough for yourself. That's when she notices, not because you wanted her to, but because your silence carries weight again, because your movements are no longer reactions, they are decisions. So picture him, that man, still, in the center of the storm, not resisting the wind, not fighting the rain, just there, grounded, focused, whole. That is what Stoicism looks like when lived, not preached. That is what power feels like when you stop giving it away. She may not understand your silence. Others may question it. But if it is born from truth, from presence, from self-respect, they will feel it, and they will remember it, even if they never say a word.